propaganda is not just a bunch of lies. Most people think that's what it is, so they think they can spot it in a second. I'm smart enough, I can spot a lie when I see one. Nobody can fool me, we think. But modern propaganda is far more subtle and sophisticated than a straight out lie. It's a highly sophisticated science. Propaganda is half truth, limited truth, and truth out of context. It's part of propaganda's nature and power to be concealed and disguised. Here we are today at a time when all of America seems to be falling apart. With COVID, race riots, church burnings, desecrations of statues of Our Lady, how can we care about the sexual revolution at a time like this? Why would anybody even bother to care about something that happened 50 years ago? I think we need to realize that the battles we're fighting in our culture today, from the sexual revolution to race riots and church burnings, are all interconnected. The question we're fighting about in America and the world today is, what does it mean to be a person? Are we made in the image of God, and are we made for eternal joy? Or are we just sophisticated sexual animals meant to acquire as much power as we possibly can before we die? If we're just sophisticated animals, what's wrong with sex trafficking? What's wrong with pornography? What's wrong with destroying the family? What's wrong with a policeman killing George Floyd in the streets? If there's no God, and there's nothing in this world that's sacred, and our brief time on this earth is all about how we can assert our own power, what's the point? In a totally self-created world, you can do whatever you want, you can be whatever you want, you can say whatever you want, and nobody can stop you. We look all around us at our culture. Everything is in upheaval, and yet nowhere does anyone appear to be responsible for all of this. Where did it all come from? Well, I'm here to tell you today at least one place where it comes from. For the past 100 years or so, a lot of this has been driven by a highly sophisticated science of propaganda. The problem is that propaganda, the kind that can change your life and ruin your life, is purposely designed to be invisible. So today we're going to talk about propaganda, what it is, how it works, and how you can spot it. We can't look at all the propaganda we're subjected to every day because there's so much of it. We can't even begin to talk about it all. But as someone who wrote sex revolution propaganda for Cosmo for the last 2 decades, or for 2 decades, not the last 2 decades, but for 2 decades, I can tell you about some of the propaganda that was used to sell the sex revolution's false values to American women. And a lot of the rules we followed, the rules, and there are rules to propaganda, a lot of those rules we followed are still being used to sell many other false values to Americans today. To start with a little bit of my personal background, I grew up as a small town in Iowa, in a little town called New Hampton during the 1950s. My father owned a shoe store where my homemaker mother worked part-time. Marriage was forever in those days. In my high school class of 150 or so students, I only knew one girl whose parents were divorced. Only one. Can you imagine? And yet, in my youthful innocence, I thought all those people in my small town had small town minds. And I longed to escape to New York City to become part of what I imagined to be the real world. I was very glamour struck. I wanted to be sophisticated. And after I graduated from the University of Missouri School of Journalism, I went with my husband to New York City. I was married already. We were married in those days at 21. I was married when I landed a job at Cosmopolitan magazine in New York City. It was 1971. The sexual revolution was in full swing, and I was an ambitious young woman. Cosmo was the hottest women's magazine in the nation, and I was there. One of the first things I learned when I got a job on staff at Cosmo was that a lot of those stories about single women hopping into bed with men were completely made up, having these happy-go-lucky lives and sex lives. So the first thing propagandists do when they're working to destroy our culture is this: they tell stories. They create partially true narratives to distort the whole truth. Helen Gurley Brown, who was Cosmo's editor-in-chief, she's the one that changed Cosmo from a general interest magazine into a sex rag. And she did that in the mid-60s. She had even written up a set of rules telling us how to make up stories for the magazine and even how to make up experts. So you're talking here again about rules on how to manufacture propaganda. Here's what one of the rules says. Unless you are a recognized authority on a subject, profound statements must be attributed to somebody appropriate, even if the writer has to invent the authority. In other words, it's okay, even good, to invent an authority if you can't find a real person to say what you want them to say. And then she gives two examples of what she means. She says, bad, this is bad. All psychiatrists are basically Freudians. Well, of course, that's only partially true. Not all psychiatrists are Freudians, but some of them are. Better, she says, this is better. According to one practitioner who specializes in group therapy, all psychiatrists are Freudians. So now we've invented this authority to tell us this lie. So presumably the reader, the young, innocent young lady, will be more inclined to believe it. So propagandists also create fake authorities. Since most young women in America were not part of the sexual revolution, the sexual revolution was manufactured out of whole cloth. We also had to make this libertine lifestyle appear more widespread than it actually was. And how are we going to do this? Well, Helen tells us how. How do you make something that's not happening look like it's happening everywhere? Here's what she says. When making up stories about ordinary women, whom she called civilians, and I guess we're in the army, the propagandists are in the army, and everybody else out there is a civilian. When making up stories about ordinary women, try to locate some of the buildings, restaurants, nightclubs, parks, streets, as well as entire case histories, all these case histories are made up, in cities other than New York, even if you deliberately have to plant them somewhere else. So most writers live in New York. 92% of our readers do not. So by making up these women and planting them in places like Cleveland and Des Moines and Albuquerque, of course, we made the sex revolution's false promises look a lot more widespread than they actually were. Okay. The unspoken message to the young reader with this is, everybody else is doing this. Why are you being such a stick in the mud? Get out there and have fun, you know? So propagandists also make their values seem more widespread than they actually are. Another favorite propaganda technique is to make up false polls and release them through the media. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who spilled the beans on the propaganda that sold abortion to American women and to American people, talked about how they just manufactured a bunch of false polls to make abortion look more popular than it actually was. And they released them through the media reprinted them, and pretty soon they were everywhere. Well, now back to Cosmo. Within these rules, Helen also gives examples of the types of fictitious anecdotes or little parables she wants to see in her magazine. So for example, here's a story invented about an imaginary girl named Erica, doesn't exist, that appeared in an article entitled, "One Man is Not Enough." Okay. She had been living for now these were appeared in the 1970s, okay? These are the stories, but these sorts of stories are still appearing today in various places all over the place. Anyway, one man is not enough. She had been living for a definition of feminine nature that was doing her an injustice. In locking herself into a monogamous relationship with a married man, she was, more often than not, left with no man at all. The elusive fellow in question did plan to marry her as soon as he could work his wife around to giving him a divorce. But in the meantime, poor Erica is all lonely and upset. Okay. So is Cosmo's advice not to sleep with married men? Oh, no, 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 no. Cosmo's advice is to sleep not with one married man, but with several. So in her best-selling book, Sex and the Single Girl, Helen wrote, "It seems to me the solution is not to rule out married men, but to keep them as pets. While they're using you to varnish their egos, you use them to add spice to your life. I say them advisedly. One married man is dangerous. A potpourri can be fun." Creepy, huh? Yeah. One thing that was very important to Cosmo, and it's an essential aspect of all effective propaganda, is the tone in which these fake stories are told. Cosmo was written in the tone of big sister talking to little sister. Our tone was very chatty, conversational, and intimate, as if we were cluing you in on inside knowledge you would only hear from your best friend. The unspoken message to our reader, whom we called that Cosmo girl, was, see how déclassé the rest of the world is compared to sophisticated insiders like us? You can see how seductive and appealing this tone can be to an insecure young girl who's afraid she's not pretty enough or popular enough or fashionable enough and wants to be smart and seen as smart and sophisticated. Propaganda is the language of the serpent. By now, I think you can see that propaganda is not just a bunch of lies. Most people think that's what it is, so they think they can spot it in a second. I'm smart enough, I can spot a lie when I see one. Nobody can fool me, we think. But modern propaganda is far more subtle and sophisticated than a straight out lie. It's a highly sophisticated science. Propaganda is half truth, limited truth, and truth out of context. It's part of propaganda's nature and power to be concealed and disguised. So for example, let me show you how subtle propaganda is. Edward Bernays, a nephew of Sigmund Freud's, pioneered the scientific technique of shaping and manipulating public opinion. He was one of the first public relations men in America. In 1928, Bernays wrote a book called Propaganda, in which he explained how to transform the buyer's very world, the world around her, to sell products and ideas. You can sell ideas with propaganda as well. For example, now here's Bernays. How do you sell pianos to the middle class? Because a piano is a pretty high ticket item. You sell pianos by selling the music room. You have all these upscale magazines like House Beautiful and Architectural Digest showing pictures of upper class homes with beautiful music rooms, sending the unspoken message that all the stylish, chic people have music rooms in their homes. And once you get the middle class to believe that they need a music room, the person who's reading these articles will say, I've got to have a piano. Well, how do you sell beautiful clothes, makeup, expensive perfumes, hairstyling products, singles travel, contraception, abortions? You sell them by selling the Cosmo lifestyle. You make up a lot of these stories about how this is the most wonderful, glamorous lifestyle a woman could ever possibly have. No problem, ladies, just go for it. This is the way to be really happy. And once you sell that sexy lifestyle to a woman, she'll just naturally conclude, I've got to have all these other products. Propaganda is more than just a bunch of lies. It's a marketing tool. It sells stuff, and it contains some truth, but it's twisted. Okay? So let's go back again to some of those rules that must never be broken when you're writing for Cosmo. And as I say, these rules are applied in a lot of other places as well. Now we come to the cardinal rule that must never be broken by our editors and writers who want to be successful at Cosmo. Here's the quote: avoid attacking advertisers. Cosmetics, liquor, bra, and girdle, this is from the 70s, girdles, and etc. And where convenient, mention advertised brands rather than non-advertised brands. In other words, if scientists say anything bad about the pill or about abortion, you must not write about it. Telling the truth about contraception, abortion, the sex revolution, and anything that's sold by Cosmo's advertisers is considered an attack. We're often told we live in a democracy with freedom of speech and a free press, but in reality, this was hidden censorship of the free press in action. It all happens almost constantly today, and far more than many journalists know or are willing to admit. Most of this propaganda, a lot of this propaganda is aimed right at journalists, and if they buy into it, they just pass it on to you. Helen claimed that what held you back from being successful in the workplace is, and this is her quote, the built-in mechanism in your body that allows you to have babies. In other words, basically being a woman. And in her view, the way for a young woman to become liberated and get ahead is to work hard, take the pill, and if the pill fails, get an abortion. And in an unseen way, the Cosmo lifestyle, which almost all the women's fashion magazines are selling today, is both pro-casual sex and anti-motherhood. The two go hand in hand. Once a young woman is convinced that she has to please a man by having sex with him out of wedlock, she's almost has to take the pill. And since the pill can fail, she needs abortion as the backup. The one thing that's never discussed in all of this is that you don't have to have sex to please a man. You can say no. If a young man is pressuring a young woman to have sex and won't take no for an answer, that's a good sign she doesn't want that guy because he wants to use her primarily for his own pleasure and he will never love her with his whole heart. In the old days, in my days, in the late 1960s and 1970s, you waited, or you tried to wait until that man said yes, and then you went ahead and you got married, and you stayed married for life. I was married for 40 years to the most beautiful man, and I didn't have to say yes to sex before we got married. One newsworthy reality we were never allowed to discuss in Cosmo was the pill. Which at that time we were able to discuss the pill, but not able to talk about the controversies around it, the medical controversies. Many young feminists in the 1960s, now this is interesting, you might not know this, were radically opposed, the feminists were radically opposed to the pill because of its harmful side effects. In her book, The Doctor's Case Against the Pill, published in 1969, one of the big feminists of that time, freelance medical journalist Barbara Seaman, launched the women's health revolution when she revealed over 50 potential side effects of the pill, ranging from blood clots and infertility to breast cancer and depression. In 1970, Seaman's revelations sparked a U.S. Senate hearing, the Nelson Pill hearings, Nelson Pill hearings. Angry young women repeatedly disrupted the hearings, demanding to know why female patients weren't testifying and why there was no pill for men. As a result of the Nelson Pill hearings, which we never hear about today, pharmaceutical companies were forced to place a health warning to patients on oral contraceptives, the first informational insert on any prescription drug. That's why we have informational inserts on prescription drugs today, because of the Nelson Pill hearings. But Seaman, who earned her living as a magazine writer, as I did, as a freelance magazine writer, paid a steep career price for telling the truth. In the 1980s, she was essentially blacklisted from magazines by pharmaceutical companies who would not advertise in publications that carried her stories. Magazines that would no longer publish Seaman's articles because she was against the pill included, listen to this, Ladies' Home Journal, Family Circle, Omni, and Hadassah, which is a Jewish magazine. So Cosmo isn't the only women's magazine pushing propaganda for the pill and for abortion and for everything else. They're all in cahoots. Propaganda is hidden in what you see and hear, but it's also hidden in what you don't see. And one thing in Cosmo that you never, ever, ever saw, that was never, ever mentioned, was God. You couldn't mention God in Cosmo, but you could have lots of astrology columns. And where does propaganda hit the hardest? Where does it strike us the hardest? In our thoughts. Propaganda plants ideas within our minds that seek to influence our reason, memories, and imaginations, and ultimately our wills. In other words, propaganda is purposely designed not just to change what you think, but also to change how you act. The propaganda can suggest ideas indirectly through our senses, especially through what we see and hear. The ideas may come through conversations, reading, or various social and communications media. The ideas come to you through your senses, especially with what you see and hear. And of course, Cosmo, as I say, is not the only magazine doing this. So for anything, you've got Marie Claire, Teen Vogue, Glamour, Self. They're all selling this false sense of glamour. So women will buy all the products their advertisers are selling. And they're doing this by pretending to be on your side. Even as they try to con you into thinking you'll never be beautiful enough or successful enough or wonderful enough unless you buy all this stuff. They're also trying to sell you on the idea that somehow they're your best friend. If you ever feel insecure, and who doesn't, the people putting out these glossy pages will be sure to tell you that they alone know how to make you feel good about yourself. And how do they work to convince you that they're in your court? They do it by telling stories about people a lot like you who found happiness and the answers to all their problems in pleasure, singlehood, divorce, childlessness, and particularly in casual sex. Their propaganda messages have even wormed their ways into our schools in what we call sex education classes. But there's often no difference today between what's being taught in many of those sex education classes and what's being taught to you on the pages of Cosmo. Are women's magazines a teaching tool? You bet they are. And so is television, so is radio, so is the internet. The messages are coming at us 24/7, 365 today. So here we go. All right, there we are. That's how propaganda works. So in the midst of all this propaganda created upheaval, what can we or anyone do? First and foremost, we must silence our hearts, pray, and listen. We cannot do this alone because we are not alone. God is with us. First, learn to pray, a monk once told me. Then you will easily perform all your good works. And he's right. Second, amid all the lies and dangers we see around us, from the sexual revolution to COVID to race riots to church burnings, now this is going to be hard, but we need to maintain our peace of heart. A few days ago, I came across a little book written by a French priest named Father Jacques Philippe. He knows all about activism, and he had this to say: the first thing of which we must be convinced is that all the good we can do comes from God and from Him alone. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. He didn't say you can't do much. He said you can do nothing. To understand why it's so essential to strive for interior peace before attempting good works, Father Philippe explained, consider the surface of a lake above which the sun is shining. If the surface of the lake is peaceful and tranquil, the sun will be reflected in this lake. And the more peaceful the lake, the more perfectly it will be reflected. But if the lake is agitated, filled with waves, then the image of the sun can't be reflected in it. Just like the image of God cannot be reflected in us if we're all upset. It's a bit like this with regard to our souls in relationship to God, he said. The more the soul is peaceful, the more God is reflected in it, and the more His grace acts through us. God is a God of peace. He does not speak and does not operate except in peace, not in trouble and agitation. So remember, action without prayer and interior peace is like a candle without a wick. However hard you work at it, it'll not catch fire. So stay calm, Pray until God inspires you, then peacefully do what he has called you to do. Finally, as those who've had our eyes opened to the great harm propaganda is doing to our nation, we can combat all the propaganda around us by telling true stories. As a small town girl from Iowa, I did reach what many would consider the peak of the glamorous, self-centered life. I wrote for Cosmo. I was on the Oprah show. I rode in limousines. I was given all expense-paid press trips all over the world, and it was all an illusion. You can't tell a bunch of lies without having them backfire on you. And I was telling lies, remember. What made me the most miserable was having an abortion when I was 27. What made me happiest was my beautiful 40-year marriage. What made me happiest was baking homemade breads and chocolate chip cookies and planting flowers and spending time with my husband and my 2 children. Today, what has healed the pains of my past and brings me the deepest joy I have ever known is my relationship with the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and my time in liturgical prayer. A year ago, I even jumped into the void, took a leap of faith, and moved from California to Wyoming to follow a good priest I trust to tell me the truth. And guess what? He did not stop celebrating the liturgies during COVID. He kept everything going. He was, during Holy Week and the week after Easter, called Bright Week, we were in church for approximately 45 hours. No masks, lots of singing, sheer joy. Anytime you proclaim the truth, and Christ is the truth in person, you contribute to the good in society and combat the evil. At age 72, going back to Cosmo again, at age 72, after earning millions of dollars and living a rich, glamorous, famous life, Helen Gurley Brown, who often stayed at the office until midnight, working to sell the sex revolution to American women, told Psychology Today, this is when she was 72, she told Psychology Today it was no fun to wake up scared every morning. That's when she told the true story, the truth of her life. And that's a story that can change hearts. Fear is what we get when we cut God out of our lives. The Ruth Institute, of course, is working on behalf of victims of the sexual revolution. If you're a victim of the sexual revolution, or you know others who are victims, and we all do, you need to realize that your suffering can actually be a gift from God in disguise. Everything is a gift. You can use this suffering and fight all the lies about sex in our culture by simply telling the truth and living the truth. You've been there. Your experiences count. What sex revelation lies did you buy into? What lessons did you learn from that? What good came out of all that pain? And how can you tell your story in a way that will prevent others from going through what you went through? If you listen to God in prayer and prayerfully act on what he tells you to do, there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that your irreplaceable contribution will make a difference. In the inspiring words of St. John Henry Newman, God has a good for you to accomplish, and he will not cast you aside. So expose the propaganda's partial truths with the whole truth of your life, and trust that God will take care of the rest. Thank you, my friends.
You've been listening to the Dr. J Show, a production of the Ruth Institute. The Ruth Institute equips Christians to defend the family and build a civilization of love. Check out our website at ruthinstitute.org for helpful resources and support. Join us on Facebook. Our podcasts can also be found online at ruthinstitute.org. I'm Father Mark Hodges. Thank you for watching.